The grand ballroom of the city's most expensive hotel shimmered under 1,000 tiny lights. It was the annual charity gala for the Children's Hospital, the biggest event of the social calendar. Men in crisp black tuxedos and women in gowns that sparkled like crushed ice filled the space. The air hummed. It hummed with conversation, with laughter, with the soft clink of wine glasses being toasted. Waiters in white jackets moved like silent ghosts between round tables covered in white cloth, delivering plates of fancy food that looked more like art than dinner dot in a quiet corner at a table marked Table 9. A woman watched the scene with calm, dark eyes. Her name was Elena. She sat perfectly still, her hands resting in her lap. A simple, elegant black dress draped her frame, and a single silver necklace caught the light. To anyone glancing over, she seemed perhaps a little shy, or maybe just bored by the long speeches. But Elena was not bored. She was observing. She felt the party more than she heard it. The thump of the bass from the small dance band vibrated up through the floor and into the legs of her chair. When people at her table laughed, she could see their shoulders shake and their heads tilt back. When someone a few seats away set their glass down too hard, she saw the small jump of liquid inside it. Elena was profoundly deaf. She had been since she was a small child after a severe illness. The world of sound was a mystery to her, but the world of vibration and movement was a language she read perfectly dot next to her. Her older sister Anya was talking animatedly with a businessman about donation numbers. Anya was the reason Elena was here. Anya was a successful business owner and a major donor to the hospital. Every year, she insisted Elena come. "I need my good luck charm," she would sign with her quick, expressive hands. Their sign language. Conversations were a private dance in the middle of the noisy crowd. Elena's eyes drifted to the center of the room, where a beautiful, grand piano sat on a small raised platform. It was polished to a mirror shine, reflecting the crystal chandeliers above. It was waiting. The scheduled entertainment was a man in a tailcoat, a well-known local pianist. He had played earlier, his fingers flying across the keys. Elena had watched him closely. The music he made was, to her, a series of fascinating physical reactions. She saw the gentle sway of his body, the ripple of muscles in his forearms, the way his foot would press down on a pedal. She saw the audience nod along, but she also saw the way many of them kept talking, their eyes drifting to their phones. The sound reached their ears, but for many, it did not seem to reach their hearts. A memory flashed in Elena's mind, sudden and warm. It was the old baby grand piano in their parents' sun-filled living room. She was 7 years old, not long after her world had gone quiet. Frustrated and angry, she would slam her hands on the keys, loving the powerful jolt that ran up her arms. Her sister would cover her ears and pretend to yell. Then, one day, instead of slamming, she had pressed a single key gently. She felt a clean, sweet vibration. She pressed another and another, discovering that each key had a different feeling, a different personality under her fingertips. That piano became her friend, her voice. She would play for hours, her head leaned against its side, feeling the songs travel through the wood and into her bones. She hadn't played that piano, or any piano in public, since her university days. That part of her life felt like a closed book. The current pianist finished his piece with a flourish. Polite applause filled the air, a wave of moving hands that Elena observed with a smile. The event's host, a popular weatherman from the local news channel with a very bright smile, bounced back onto the stage. He tapped the microphone, causing a feedback squeal that made the crowd wince a reaction. Elena noted from their sudden frowns and hands flying to ears. Wasn't that just wonderful? The host boomed, his voice echoing. Now, folks, before we begin our fantastic live auction for some truly incredible prizes, let's have a little fun. He grinned, scanning the crowd. This is a night of hidden talents, I'm sure. Who among us is secretly amazing? Come on, don't be shy. Do a trick, tell a joke, sing a song. We'll add an extra $500 to the donation pot from our sponsors for anyone brave enough. A few people giggled nervously. A young man in the back was nudged by his friends, but shook his head, turning red. The host was about to laugh it off and move on when Anya's hand shot straight up in the air, high and confident. Elena's heart dropped. She knew that look on her sister's face. It was the same look she had when she signed Elena up for the school talent show all those years ago. Yes, the lovely lady at table 9, the host announced, pointing. All the light in the room seemed to focus on their corner. Anya stood, not bothering with the microphone. Her voice, used to commanding boardrooms, carried clearly. My sister, she said, placing a firm, loving hand on Elena's shoulder. She plays the piano beautifully. A murmur, curious and kind, rustled through the crowd. Every single pair of eyes in the ballroom now locked onto Elena. She felt their gaze like a physical weight. Her mouth went dry. She shook her head at Anya, her fingers moving quickly under the table where only her sister could see. No, stop, I can't. Anya just leaned down, her face close to Elena's. Her hand spoke under the cover of the tablecloth, her sign small but urgent. Asterisk, remember our living room? Remember the vibration? Play for the children, not for them. Asterisk, she nodded towards the crowd. For the kids who can't be here. The host, sensing a good moment for the show, clapped his hands. Let's give a big round of encouragement. Come on up, dear. The applause started again, encouraging, expectant. It was a trap of kindness, and there was no escape. Elena looked from her sister's determined, loving face to the sea of strangers, then to the silent, shining piano. It had been so long. The world of sound was theirs, but the world of feeling, that was hers. Taking a deep, slow breath that did little to calm her racing heart, she pushed her chair back. She stood up, her black dress rustling softly, smoothing the fabric with slightly trembling hands. She began the long, slow walk across the ballroom floor, the eyes of the entire gala following her every step. The walk to the piano felt like the longest walk of her life. The polished wooden floor seemed to stretch out forever. Every click of her own heels echoed in a way she could feel through her feet, a sharp little tap that matched the frantic beat of her heart. The lights from the chandeliers, which had seemed so beautiful from her corner, now felt hot and bright, shining directly on her. She kept her eyes down, focused on the path ahead, but she could feel it. She could feel the weight of hundreds of people watching her. It wasn't a mean stare. It was a mixture of curiosity, polite encouragement, and, she was sure, a little bit of pity. Asterisk, the poor deaf sister being pushed into this. Asterisk, she imagined them thinking. Her sister, Anya, watched from their table, her hands clasped tightly together under her chin. Her face was a mask of hope and a little bit of worry. She believed in Elena completely, but she also knew this was a big, scary thing to ask Dot. As Elena got closer to the piano, she saw the guest pianist who had played earlier. He was a kind-looking older man. He had stepped aside but hadn't left the stage area. He gave her a small, professional smile and a nod as she approached the bench. He was probably expecting her to play something simple, like chopsticks or a basic nursery rhyme. That's what most people would expect. She offered him the tiniest smile back, but inside, her stomach was a knot of twisting nerves. She reached the beautiful grand piano. Up close, it was even more impressive. The black wood was so deep and shiny, she could see a blurry reflection of herself in it, a woman in a black dress, looking very small. She placed a hand gently on its side. The wood was cool and smooth. This was it. No turning back. She carefully slid onto the long leather piano bench. It was still warm from the previous player. She adjusted her dress, buying herself a few more seconds. The crowd had grown completely silent. This silence was different from the noisy silence before. This was a waiting silence, a thick, heavy quiet full of expectation. She could see people leaning forward in their seats out of the corner of her eye. A waiter near the back door had stopped, a tray of empty glasses frozen in his hands. Elena closed her eyes. She blocked out the ballroom, the lights, the staring faces. She took a slow, deep breath, trying to remember what her old music teacher had told her, back when she could still hear his voice. Asterisk, music isn't about the noise in your ears, Elena. It's about the story in your heart. Let your fingers tell it. Asterisk, she opened her eyes, but she didn't look at the crowd. She looked at the keys. 88 black and white keys, a landscape of possibilities. They were just keys to everyone else. But to her, they were a map. Each one was a different place, a different feeling. Slowly, she lifted her hands. They felt clumsy, like they didn't belong to her. What was she even going to play? The piece she had practiced for years, the one she felt in her bones, was her own. She had never given it a name. It was just the music that came out when she was alone, when she was happy or sad or just thinking. It was her private conversation with the piano. Was this really the place for a private conversation with the whole world watching? She almost panicked. She thought about just playing a few chords and walking away. But then she thought of Anya's signs. For the children who can't be here, she thought of the reason for this whole gale, the children's hospital. She thought of the kids lying in quiet rooms, fighting battles no child should have to fight. Their world was different, too. Maybe they would understand a language of feeling. Her decision was made. Instead of sitting up, straight like the previous pianist, Elena did something that made the audience shift in their seats. She leaned forward. She brought her head down, turning it slightly so that her left cheek came to rest gently, almost lovingly, against the smooth, curved side of the piano. She closed her eyes again. To the crowd, it looked like a gesture of prayer, or maybe exhaustion. But for Elena, it was like plugging into a power source. It was how she listened to Dot, her left hand, moved first. It stretched out and pressed down on a low, deep chord near the end of the keyboard. Thumb. The sound that filled the room was a warm, rich wave. But for Elena, it was a pure, solid vibration. It traveled from the string, through the wood of the piano's body, and straight into her cheekbone, humming through her skull. It was a feeling of foundation, of gravity. It was the first word of her sentence. The audience was surprised. This was not a tinkling high note. This was something deep and serious. The few people who had been whispering immediately stopped. Then her right hand joined. It didn't fly across the keys. It walked. It began a simple, clear melody a few octaves higher. Each note was chosen carefully, allowed to ring. She wasn't playing sheet music. She was following a path of vibration. Her right foot pressed down on the sustain pedal, letting the vibrations from each note mix and swim together in the air and in the wood. The melody was sad at first. It was a lonely, searching tune. It wandered, asking a question without words. She could feel the echo of each note under her fingers and against her face. She adjusted her next note based on what she felt from the last one. Her body began to move, not with dramatic sweeps, but with small, natural sways leaning into a deep bass note, pulling back for a delicate higher one. The people in the room were no longer just watching a woman play piano. They were watching a woman have a conversation with a massive instrument. They saw her face, peaceful and focused, pressed against it. They saw her eyebrows pinch together slightly when the melody turned bittersweet, and then soften when it found a moment of sweetness. She wasn't performing for them. She was somewhere else, in a world made of rhythm and resonance that only she could fully understand. The initial curiosity in the room melted away, replaced by something deeper. The silence was no longer just polite waiting. It was a deep, shared attention. You could have heard a pin drop. The previous pianist stood off to the side, his professional smile gone, replaced by a look of profound respect. He understood what he was seeing. He was watching someone speak the true, physical language of music, a language he knew with his ears, but was now seeing felt through the entire body. Elena, lost in her world of vibration, had no idea that the room had gone utterly, completely still. She was just beginning to tell her story. The melody began to change. That first lonely, searching tune had been a question. Now, Elena's fingers started to find an answer. The deep, rumbling chords from her left hand didn't just support the melody anymore. They began to talk back to it. They created a rhythm, a heartbeat under the music. Thum-da-dum, thum-da-dum. It was like watching a flower open in fast motion. The sad, wandering notes from her right hand started to weave around that steady heartbeat. They became more sure of themselves. They climbed a little higher, danced a little faster, then looped back down in a swirl of connected notes that sounded like a sigh of relief. She wasn't just pressing keys now. Her right hand would sometimes brush across them, making a shimmering sound like sunlight catching on water. Her left foot worked the pedals carefully, sometimes letting all the vibrations mix into a beautiful soup of sound, sometimes cutting them clean so a single, pure note could hang in the air alone. Elena was completely gone from the ballroom. Her cheek was still pressed to the piano. Her eyes were closed. In her mind, she wasn't on a stage. She was back in her parents' living room, with the afternoon sun making dust motes dance in the air. She was that little girl again, discovering that even in a silent world, she could make the walls shake with feeling. The song was hers. It was the feeling of frustration turning into determination. It was the memory of learning to read her sister's lips, then her hands, building a bridge across the quiet. It was the joy of her first understood joke, seen in the crinkling of her father's eyes. The music was telling all of that, without a single word. Down in the crowd, people were forgetting to breathe. A woman at a front table had been dabbing her eye with a napkin earlier, touched by his speech. Now, she let the napkin fall to her lap, her hand frozen in the air. She was watching Elena's face. She saw the subtle shifts, the small smile that touched the corner of Elena's mouth during a sweet run of notes, the slight tightening of her jaw when the music swelled with something stronger, maybe defiance. The woman realized she wasn't just hearing a song. She was seeing a feeling. It was a completely new way to experience music. The businessman who had been talking to Anya earlier about tax deductions for charities sat with his arms crossed. His face, usually sharp and calculating, had gone soft. He was watching Elena's hands. He saw the incredible control, the strength in her fingers for the big chords, and the feather-light touch for the delicate parts. He was a man who understood precision and skill, and he was seeing a master at work. But it was more than that. It was the total physical connection that stunned him. He found himself leaning forward, elbows on the table, trying to understand how someone could be so inside the music dot at the back of the room, the young kitchen staff, who had been peeking through the round windows in the swinging doors to see the fancy party, were now fully gathered. They weren't seeing a fancy gala anymore. They were seeing a miracle. One young dishwasher, his hands still damp, whispered to the cook next to him, "She's feeling it, man. She's feeling the whole thing." The cook just nodded, unable to look away. The previous pianist, the man in the tailcoat, had taken a small step closer. His head was tilted. He was a trained musician. He could hear the structure, of what Elena was creating. It wasn't a classical sonata. It wasn't jazz or pop. It was something in between, something organic that grew from emotion rather than rules. But what captivated him wasn't the sound, it was the technique born of necessity. He watched how she would sometimes hit a chord and then instantly soften her fingers, not letting it get too loud, because she was feeling the vibration's intensity through the wood and controlling it through her body. He had never seen anything like it. He had spent his life training his ears. She had spent a lifetime training her entire nervous system. On stage, Elena transitioned into a new section. The heartbeat rhythm from the left hand faded into a gentle rolling wave of notes. The right hand began a new melody, this one full of wonder. It was higher, lighter, like someone looking up at a sky full of stars for the first time. Her right hand danced, tripping up and down the keys in patterns that sounded both playful and deeply beautiful. She swayed a little more with this part, her body moving like a sapling in a gentle breeze. This was the part of her song about discovery, about the moment she realized her world, though quiet, was not empty. It was full of texture, of vibration, of the music you could make with your own two hands. The notes sparkled. They leapt and twirled. A few people in the audience, completely lost in the moment, felt an unexpected, pure joy rise in their chests. They didn't know why. They just felt it. Anya, at the table, had tears streaming silently down her face. She wasn't sad. She was overwhelmed. She was watching her little sister, the one she had protected, the one she had spoken for so many times, speak for herself in the most powerful way imaginable. And the entire room was listening, not with pity, but with awe. Anya's hands were clenched together, so tight her knuckles were white. She was sending every bit of her strength across the room to that piano bench, a silent scream of love and pride. The room was under a spell. The silence was absolute. It was a living silence, thick with shared emotion. No one coughed. No one shuffled a chair. The waiters stood like statues. The world outside the cars, the city, it all ceased to exist. There was only this woman, this piano, and this incredible, wordless story flowing from her heart, through her hands, into the wood and strings, and out into the hearts of hundreds of strangers who had, just minutes before, been thinking about dinner and donations. They were all thinking about the same thing now. They were thinking about what it means to feel, and they were all, every single one of them, feeling it together. The playful, sparkling melody of wonder could not last forever. Like a breath held in delight, it had to be released. Elena's music began to slow. The dancing notes from her right hand came farther apart, each one ringing clear and lonely again in the huge, quiet room. The rolling waves from her left hand softened into gentle ripples, then into single, deep notes that hung in the air like distant bells. The feeling in the room shifted with the music. The joy that had lifted people up settled into something deeper, more fragile. It was a feeling of longing. The story in the music was changing. It was moving from discovery to something more complicated. Alana's body told the story. The light swaying stopped. Her shoulders, which had been relaxed, now carried a slight tension. The fingers of her right hand, which had been dancing, now moved with a careful, aching slowness. They would press a key and then linger, as if holding on to the feeling it created until the very last vibration faded from under her skin. Her left hand played chords so low and soft they were almost a rumble, felt more in the chests of the audience than heard by their ears. This part of the song was about the other side of her world, the lonely side. It was the memory of sitting at a school lunch table, watching other girls laugh at a secret she couldn't hear. It was the frustration of a doorbell ringing, a world away, unnoticed. It was the constant, gentle wall of quiet that separated her from the flow of life everyone else swam in. The music didn't scream this sadness. It whispered it. It sighed it. It was in the spaces between the notes, in the way one beautiful high note would be followed by a deep, hollow chord, a question left unanswered dot in the crowd. The woman at the front table, who had been watching Elena's face, now found her own eyes filling with tears. She wasn't crying for Elena. She was crying with her, connected by a thread of shared human feeling. She heard no. She felt the loneliness in the music, and it echoed a loneliness she had known in her own life, a memory of being left out, of feeling different. She reached out without looking and found her husband's hand, squeezing it tight. He squeezed back, his own throat feeling tight. The businessman had uncrossed his arms. His professional mask was gone. He stared at the floor, then back at Elena, his mind far from donations and tax codes. He was thinking about his own son, a boy who struggled in school, who felt apart from the other kids. He thought of the boy's quiet frustration, a feeling he could never quite reach or fix. This music, this woman translating feeling directly into sound, felt like a key to understanding something he had been missing. For the first time all night, he wasn't thinking about the cost of anything. He was just feeling the priceless weight of the moment. At the kitchen doors, the young dishwasher was no longer whispering. He had a lump in his throat. He thought about his mother, working 2 time zones away, and the static-filled phone calls where they mostly just said, "I miss you." This music sounded like that feeling. It sounded like distance, and love stretched thin across it. Elena's head moved slightly against the piano's wood. A single tear, warmed by her skin, escaped from under her closed eyelid and traced a slow path down her cheek, gleaming in the stage lights. She didn't brush it away. She let it fall. It was part of the song now. Her right hand found a simple, repeating pattern of 5 notes. It was a cycle. Around and around it went, beautiful but going nowhere, trapped. It was the feeling of trying to explain your world to someone who will never fully understand. The silence in the ballroom was now a physical presence. It had weight and temperature. It was a cold, respectful silence, a shared shiver. People were holding themselves still, afraid that the smallest movement might break the fragile spell, might interrupt this raw, honest confession happening without words. The air itself seemed to be listening. Then something changed. It started in Elena's left hand. That deep, rumbling chord repeated. But this time it was firmer. It had a purpose. It pushed back against the cycling, trapped melody of the right hand. The right hand hesitated. The cycling notes faltered, broke their pattern. They tried to go back, but the left hand played the strong chord again. Thumb, it was a decision. It was a moment of choice, heard by everyone. The right hand stopped its lonely cycle. It lifted, and then came down not on a single note, but on a rich, complex chord of its own. It was a chord of resolution, of acceptance. The deep note from the left hand and the new chord from the right hand met and held, their vibrations mingling, no longer fighting but supporting each other. Elena's body relaxed. The tension left her shoulders. The aching slowness was gone, replaced by a new, steady certainty. This was the final part of the story. It wasn't about the sadness anymore. It was about what grew from it. It was about the strength that comes from making peace with your own quiet. It was about finding a voice in a different language of touch, of sight, of felt vibration. It was about the love of a sister who pushed you onto a stage to show you that you were never broken, just different. The music began to build, not in a loud, crashing way, but in a layered, powerful way. The left hand established a steady, walking rhythm, a firm path forward. The right hand began to sing a new melody over the top. This melody had echoes of the first lonely tune and the second joyful one, but now they were woven together. It was sad and happy all at once. It was full. It was complete. It was the sound of a whole person. Alana's face, still pressed to the piano, finally showed a calm, deep peace. The tear track had dried. Her fingers flew now, with a confidence that seemed impossible just minutes before. She was no longer just feeling the music. She was leading it, conducting the vibrations with her whole being, pouring every memory of silence and every spark of connection into the final, beautiful climb of her song. The room waited, every soul in it lifted and carried along on a current of pure, shared emotion, all the way to the edge of their seats. The final climb of the music was like a sunrise. It didn't blaze. It unfolded. Elena's right hand swept up the piano in a cascade of bright, clear notes, each one a step higher, filled with a hard-won hope. The deep, walking rhythm from her left hand kept its steady pace underneath, a foundation that would not break. It was the sound of someone who had walked through a quiet valley and was now climbing a hill, not to escape the quiet, but to see the view from the top. She played the last few notes. They were simple, solid, and strong. One final, rich chord from both hands together, held until the vibration filled every corner of the huge room. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, she lifted her hands from the keys and let them rest in her lap. Her foot came off the pedal. The last vibration hummed in the strings, in the wood, and then faded into nothing. Silence. It was a different kind of silence than before. The silence that had fallen while she played had been full of listening. This new silence was full of something that had just happened, something huge, and no one knew what to do with it. It was a stunned, breathless quiet. Elena stayed where she was for a long minute. Her cheek still rested against the cool wood of the piano. She felt empty in a good way, like she had poured her whole self out and was now light and clean. Slowly she straightened up. She opened her eyes. The bright lights of the ballroom made her blink. And then she saw them, hundreds of faces, all turned toward her. Not a single person was moving. They were frozen in their seats, at their tables, in the aisles. The waiter with the tray was still a statue. The staff at the kitchen doors were just shapes behind the glass, unmoving. For a terrifying second, she thought she had done something wrong. Had the music been bad? Was it strange? A hot flush of embarrassment started to crawl up her neck. Then she saw her sister. Anya was on her feet at table 9. Her hands were clasped over her mouth, and her face was wet with tears. But her eyes were blazing with a light so fierce and proud it could have powered the whole city. She wasn't just clapping. She was shaking with the effort of not making a sound, as if the spell was too precious to break. Elena's eyes moved to the businessman next to Anya. He was standing now, too. He was a tall, serious man, but he was clapping, his strong hands coming together slowly, firmly, with a respect that looked like it came from the bottom of his heart. Then, like a dam breaking, the room exploded. It didn't start with a roar. It started with a rush, like a wave. First, it was the rustle of fabric as every single person in the ballroom rose to their feet. Then the sound hit. The applause was thunderous. It wasn't the polite, quick clapping for the previous pianist. This was deep, sustained, and powerful. It was a physical force. People weren't just clapping. They were cheering. Men were whistling. Women were wiping their eyes and clapping even harder. Elena flinched, not from the sound, but from the sudden, violent movement of it all. She could see it, the rapid blur of hundreds of pairs of hands crashing together. She could feel the vibrations of the stomping feet coming through the stage floor. The air in the room seemed to pulse and shake. She looked out, overwhelmed, her hands still folded in her lap. She saw strangers turning to each other, talking excitedly, their faces full of emotion, pointing at her at the piano. They were smiling through tears. The host, the weatherman, walked onto the stage. He was trying to look professional, but his own eyes were shiny. He waited, letting the applause roll on and on. It didn't want to stop. He finally had to raise his hands, asking for quiet. It took a full minute for the crowd to settle back into their seats, the energy still buzzing in the air like electricity. He turned to Elena, who was still sitting at the piano bench, looking small and shocked. Instead of speaking to the room, he first turned his back to the crowd and faced her directly. He made sure she could see his lips. He moved his hands, clumsy but clear, forming the only sign he knew. Thank you. He held his fist to his chest and moved it in a small circle. Thank you, from my heart. Elena's breath caught. She gave him a small, wobbly nod. Then he turned to the microphone. His voice, usually so smooth and loud, was thick and quiet. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, and then he had to stop and clear his throat. I don't think I have the words. I don't think any of us do. He looked back at Elena, then out at the crowd. We came here tonight to raise money for children who are fighting battles in quiet rooms. I think we just witnessed one of them win a battle. We were shown in the most beautiful way possible that music, that the human spirit, doesn't live in the ears. He tapped his chest. It lives in here. It lives in the hands that speak and the heart that feels. He paused as another wave of applause rippled through the room. You have given us more than a performance tonight. You have given us a gift, a reminder. Thank you. He walked over to Elena and gently offered his hand to help her up from the bench. She took it, her own hand trembling slightly. As she stood, the crowd rose to their feet again, the applause renewing with fresh energy. She didn't bow like a normal performer. She just stood there, looking at them all, her hand still in the host's. Then she brought her free hand to her own heart, just as he had done, and nodded to the room. Thank you. She walked off the stage, the applause washing over her like a warm wave. Anya was already rushing through the crowd. She didn't say a word. She just threw her arms around her sister, holding her tighter than she had in years. Elena buried her face in her sister's shoulder. The noise and the lights and the staring faces finally blocked out. The rest of the night was a blur. People she didn't know came up to her, not to talk, but to touch her arm gently, to smile, to give a thumbs up, to place a hand over their own heart. The auction that followed was a frenzy. Items went for 5, 10 times their value. When the final total was announced, it was a number so large the host had to repeat it twice. It was triple what they had ever raised before, but Elena didn't hear the number. She was sitting back at table 9, holding a glass of water with both hands. She was tired, deeply tired, but a calm warmth sat in her chest. She wasn't thinking about the money. She was thinking about the silence that had held the room while she played. A silence she had created. A silence that, for the first time in her life, didn't feel like a wall. It had felt like a bridge. And for one night, hundreds of people had crossed it to meet her in the middle. She took a sip of water, looked at her sister's beaming, proud face, and knew she would never think of her quiet world in the same way again.